I don't want to make my entire channel about languages, but let's just have a quick conversation about language, specifically French language, French literature, and the history of the French language. So today, French is known as a language of precision, a language of communication, sometimes even considered a romantic language. However, this was not always the case. Actually, this specifically began after the 16th century due to a group called La Pléiade. La Pléiade was actually a group of 16th century French Renaissance poets who actually had as a primary goal to make French recognized as a legislative, artistic, and bureaucratic language. Before this, the lingua franca of France, which is like the standardized language that was spoken among legislative communities, the nobility, or used for preaching or for religious scripture, was actually Greek and Latin. So this was actually quite normal in Europe at the time. European countries used as their official language oftentimes Latin or Greek, and they did not actually use the language of the common people as their official language. And that had a lot of reasons. One is that at the time in the 16th century, France was not actually an official state. This only happened after the Westphalian Treaty, which happened in 1648, midway through the 17th century. Another reason that French was not the official standardized language of France is because what we consider to be French is really just Parisian. It's very much the same as in China. What we consider to be Chinese is really just Mandarin, which is spoken in Shanghai and in Beijing, whereas there's 42 different versions of Chinese spoken in China. It's kind of the same thing in France, except with a lesser degree of diversity. I'm just going to link all the regional versions of French that actually exist in France, so you can see the diversity of different dialects that are spoken in France. But what we consider to be French is really just Parisian French, much like what we consider to be Italian is really just the Roman version of Italian, because typically the standardized language of a country will be the language that is spoken at its capital. That we said all of that, let's go back to La Pléiade. Among the group of La Pléiade, there was a man called Joachim du Bellay, this dude over here. And essentially he wrote a book in which he defended French, saying that it offered the same degree of precision, the same degree of richness as Greek or as Latin, and that it should be used for literature and it should also be used for legislation. Joachim criticized the fact that many people were ashamed of their mother tongue, and he also, in his book, shamed the intellectuals who are using Latin for their ambitious work. Instead, he proposed that French was a language that had so much potential if only it would borrow the words it was missing from Latin. And keep in mind, at the time when he was writing this, French was literally just considered the language of the people, and the nobility and people that were working in bureaucracy actually all communicated in Latin. I mean, it's interesting he wrote that, because if you ask me today, I would say that French seems to have a higher degree of precision to it than Latin. This book, La Défense et l'illustration de la langue française, is monumental in the history of the French language, in the history of France, actually. Because of this book, the King of France decided to make French the official language of law and administration, and because of that, there was more political involvement by the French population because they could understand the law.